So, good morning. Today I get to talk to Bill Ferreira, and I'm super excited about that. You have some unique experiences that I think are super cool. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live now, where you've been, and then we'll.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting me to visit here. I've been enjoying the podcast so far myself. The few interviewees that you've had, wealth of knowledge, and appreciate you doing this to get documentation for a lot of makers and craftsmen out there. But for myself personally, I grew up on a little more unusual story than most. I grew up on the big island of Hawaii, and the rich ranching culture there that a lot of people I think are still very unaware of how big of a ranching culture there is in Hawaii. And the link there basically is the Californios came over to Hawaii in the 1830s at the behest of the Hawaiian king at the time, Kamehameha, and taught the Hawaiians basically how to handle and work the cattle that many years prior, late 1700s, cattle first introduced to Hawaii, with the intentions by the whalers being a food source, being in the middle of the Pacific. Here's a stop off point. They can get salt beef and stock their ships. And they convinced the king to put a kapu or a ban on slaughter, and the cattle kind of went wild. There's no natural predators. And it got to a point where it was such a problem. The king he sent to California, and 3 vaqueros from, I believe, the Monterey area hastened his bidding. And, till today, there's a lot of that traditional gear, traditional values that's still utilized in the Paniolo culture. Gotcha. So that was kind of my inkling and start into it. And I came up to Montana to go to school after high school. And being the typical ranch kid that didn't fly, I ended up doing ranch work instead. And Montana's always had a connection for me since then. I'm now living in Montana. Have been here about a little over 4 years now. And it's basically the same draw. I mean, it's the cowboy culture. It's the gear makers. It's there's a connection no matter where you go. So
that's pretty cool. That's really cool. So when did you start braiding?
I've always been interested in it. I spent a lot of time around a lot of old timers. It was just kind of in my nature, even as a kid, to spend more time. I was drawn more to the elders than playing with my friends. And because of being around a lot of the old timers, there was this draw to all of the old gear. And fortunately, we've been around some really good ones that fostered it. And that's basically what there's just something about rawhide that draws me. And the hard part was in the time frame I was wanting to learn. A lot of the ones that would be able to teach were already gone, or those that were able to show you anything were very closed-minded at that point. If I was showing anyone, it would be a family member or something. It was kind of a secretive thing.
Yeah.
I remember walking into shops and people they'd cover things up and they'd hide it, and it was just, I get it at that time frame. You're protecting your livelihood. I get it. Today we are so fortunate that that mentality has very much changed. It's
Yeah.
done a total 180. Most makers are very willing to share their craft anymore. And because I went through that, I always had the mentality that my shop door's open. I
Yeah.
know how hard it is to learn. And it's been, I'd say, the last 2 or 3 years that I've really put a lot of time and effort into teaching. I've been doing a lot of teaching from the one-on-one in the shop to classes, workshops. Anytime I can help anybody that wants to learn, I'm more than willing to jump in and help. And I think that's in the rawhide community, especially, that's pretty much the norm anymore. It's so I'd say I've been braiding probably around 20, pushing 25 years, something like that. And it's only been, I'd say, in the last 5 years or something, where I'd had requests for teaching for many years, and I never felt like I was at the I was capable or at the spot to be able to teach, and I never felt like I knew enough to teach. I got to the point now where I feel comfortable. As long as I've got something that I'm able to show, I'm more than happy to show it. Though personally, I'm still learning. That's my feeling. It never ends. It never stops. You're constantly refining, constantly. I've gotten to the point where I'm nitpicky about my gear, just because it's a personal thing for me. So I'm constantly looking to improve. I look at things I built 2 months ago, and it's like, nah, that's not good enough. It needs to be, this is what change. And so it's a constant. I like Clint's wording of the journey, right? The journey never ends. I mean, you're constantly trying to improve. You're constantly trying to get better. But rawhide's it's a whole different beast than a lot of other mediums. I get a lot of leather workers who have done tons of leather. I mean, built beautiful gear, wanting to get into rawhide, and that's usually their first comment is, "Holy moly, what can of worms did I open up?" Because it is a whole different beast. It's just very different medium to work with.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me, it's intimidating if you don't have that person there to help you, because you hear, well, if your strings are too wet, they're gonna, or if they're too dry, they're gonna, you don't know.
Yeah. But here's and I hear that a lot, and here's the key. The way I kind of look at it is, I'm kind of happy I had to struggle and learn the way I did. Those struggles and those mistakes pay dividends.
Yeah.
That's the one thing with the difficulty of rawhide, is that there's no easy answer. There's no base. There's no quick fix. There's no one answer to a problem, because every single hide's different. You think of it this way: in leather working, in carving leather, saddle work, things like that, which I've done a lot of too. When I order a side of Herman oak leather, it's fairly consistent. I mean, there are differences. It may case up differently. It may carve a little differently. But for the most part, I mean, they've got a great product. It's very consistent. With rawhide, you can get two sibling animals, and they'll work completely different.
Yeah.
They'll temper differently. There's more stretch in one, less stretch in the other, or vice versa. There's color variants. There's one holds its temper, one wicks it really, really easily. So it's rawhides. It's tough that way.
Yeah. What's your
And
favorite hide?
I gotta say, Hereford, an
Yeah.
old Hereford owl. And I think that's more so because I grew up in the era of when Hereford was king, and that
Mm-hmm.
was what was most predominant.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, It just, for me, the color. I mean, there's nothing like a good old Hereford hide. It's very golden,
Mm-hmm.
pretty colored. What we traditionally presume rawhide's supposed to look like. Generally that's what usually works the best for me. It's what I like.
Yeah.
But learn to um, you learn to work with what you've got. Every hide, I try to tell a lot of the newcomers, every hide's good for something. It's up to us to figure out what that is.
Mm-hmm.
And it may sound goofy, but when you do it long enough, you get to a point where that hide almost tells you what it's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be by feel.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been times I've been cutting on hides for a certain project that's ordered by a customer. I'll get through cutting string and say they ordered a set of reins, and that's what I'm trying to cut string for. And in the cutting process, the feel of that hide is off.
Mm-hmm.
I will put it aside and go get another hide and start cutting because it's not going to make a good feeling set of
Yeah.
reins.
Yeah.
So it sounds funny, but it's the truth. I mean, the hide will
Yeah.
tell you good
Yeah.
for.
What was your goal when you started?
Um, like most, I think I've always admired the rawhide gear, and really couldn't truly afford it. And that was always the goal to make my own gear.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to the point where, as you're learning and getting better, well, then buddies say, hey, go make me one. Um, and you start improving and you start working on things, and you get humbled a lot. I would build a Riata and go to playing around with it, and an old timer would pick it up and it's like, oh, throw that damn thing in the trash. It don't feel like, this is not right. And you get humbled a lot. I mean, uh, it's for me, rawhide is really truly about feel.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing like the feel of a well-made product, whether that be a set of reins, a quirt, Riata. When it feels right, there's nothing like it. It just has this. It's a life all its own,
Mm-hmm.
really. Um, it's there's just something about it. It's hard to explain what it
Yeah.
is, and I see that a lot. I usually pick a few venues a year that I go to and vend some product. Like being able to get stuff in people's hands for that reason, for the feel.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and you can just see it when people pick something up and just see their eyes just open like, whoa,
Mm-hmm.
I've never felt something like this, or I knew it could feel this
Mm-hmm.
way, and that makes you feel good,
Yeah.
that you did a good job, when
Yeah.
it's that way.
What's your goal now?
Refinement,
Mm-hmm.
uh, constant refinement. Just like I say, the nitpicky stuff. Really trying to get good feeling gear. First and foremost, they've got to function properly. I think that's something that everybody would admit to. A pretty piece of gear that doesn't work well or doesn't function well is just that. I mean, it's just pretty. But something that works properly, functions properly, feels right, and has that eye appeal, that's like the whole package.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to um, try to combine all of those things and still get that eye appeal, still get that pretty. we were just discussing this at the Chico gathering, and um, how you can see maybe a set of reins or something hanging way across the room, and there's just that eye appeal. There's just something that draws you to it. I mean, maybe it's the angle of V's in the braid, or the color of the string. There's just some type of draw that really has an eye appeal to it, and that's what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Is that finish? But then again, now it can be as pretty as possible, and you go and get to it and pick it up, and if it doesn't feel right, then that just kills it right there and
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say the greatest challenge you faced is in your braiding?
Um, I'd say trying to probably the biggest struggle I would say is making it and keeping it a profession. I've been doing this now as my sole source of income, as my living, basically for the last 4 or 5 years. Um, and prior to that, it was always a side hustle, side gig.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it. It's just a matter of today doing it as a full-time braider. Um, it's challenging, and the struggle really is I call it like the elephant in the room. It's something that most makers, regardless of their craftsmanship, whether it's saddle makers, bit makers, rawhide braiders, woodworkers, hot rod builders, it doesn't matter. As a craftsman, the elephant in the room is pricing and money. And it's a hard one for a lot of people to get around. I use a bunch of examples. Um, we get a pipe break in our house. You call a plumber, he charges you $120 an hour. No questions. You write the
Mm-hmm.
check,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most of the gear we build, it's not a necessity in today's world. Like that, plumbing in your house is a necessity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a big challenge trying to price your gear. Basically, you're pricing your time. It's a challenge, and it's something that I think most of us shy away from. It's something we all avoid when um, it should be discussed a lot more openly. Um, should a maker who's put, 20 some years of their life into their craft not be rewarded for that? I don't know, a mechanic or a plumber or electrician worth their salt that's put that amount of time
Mm-hmm.
into that is not making a lot of money hourly, figuring out
Right.
their time. But yet as makers, um, you're constantly barked at, I guess, that, oh, you're charging too much for your gear, or um, not realizing. And I have a different mentality behind that. For me, time doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm one of those people that um, I could spend 6 months on one project and it wouldn't bother me at all. Just try
Mm-hmm.
to get it. How do you justify that
Mm-hmm.
to customer? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's finding that balance. I don't want one of my customers ever to feel like they didn't get the value for their dollar.
Right.
Um, weren't happy with the product. The old adage of under promise and over deliver. But at the hindsight, I got to make a living like
Right.
everyone else,
Right.
and I got to justify my time too. So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, and I this example with a few people vending, in today's world, in the horse and ranch world, um, we'll drive around a 70 or $80,000 pickup, pulling $150,000 plus living quarters trailer with maybe $150,000 worth of horse flesh in that trailer, hauling around to these shows, rodeos, what competitions, whatever you're doing, and bulk at spending $2,000 on a set of good reins.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, bottom line is the old adage still comes true. You get what you pay for.
Right.
You know, so
Right.
in that, I as a maker, I think a lot more of us need to address it. You know,
Yeah.
know
I
your
think,
worth and know what your gear is worth.
yeah. So you spent some time in Spain, is that right?
A little bit. I was fortunate enough to get an opportunity to go to Spain and Portugal on a little horse training, horse clinic deal with Dr. Miller, and quite a few years ago, about 10 years back now.
Mm-hmm.
That was an eye opener.
Mm-hmm.
You know, seeing a lot of the heritage where a lot of um, our tradition comes from. You know, that um, Spanish, Portuguese base. Um, for me, it was being Portuguese myself. It was kind of going back to the motherland. You know, it was a fun time. Seeing a lot of familiarity of things I grew up around and hearing. Um, um, but there's a lot of I'm kind of a big history buff myself, and I
Mm-hmm.
like tradition and traditional things. So for me, it was very rich that way.
Mm-hmm.
It was a big grasp. I'll spend a lot of time researching gear that I'm building, traditional California style stuff, how it changed into the different regions. For a lot of people, unless you're really into it, I guess it's hard to differentiate the regional differences. But if you're into it, there is vast differences between, say, a Great Basin buckaroo and a true coastal California to the Arizona cowpuncher to the Hawaiian Paniolo to a South American gaucho to, I mean, there are so many similarities
Mm-hmm.
uh, that we all draw upon, but the differences from area to area and depending on their climate, their conditions they're working in, type of weather they're working. I mean, all these things have variances on the type of gear they use. What works best for ultimately, they're all trying to get a job done.
Right.
And once that gets figured out, the best way to get their job done, well, they're going to adapt
Mm-hmm.
in what way they need it to.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example, in the Paniolo, Hawaiian Paniolo culture that I grew up in, they adapted the Mexican vaquero saddle to fit the tropical humid climate there in Hawaii. And the rigging system on a Mexican saddle typically is a Samstag type rigging made out of leather. And in Hawaii, in that tropical climate, the rawhide held up better than the
Mm-hmm.
cured leather did.
Can
And
you
so
help me find some photos of those and I'll add them into the end of this?
sure, I've got a few of some I've
Okay.
made years, and I can send that your way. But um, they adapted that rawhide, that rigging into rawhide, and it became a uniquely Paniolo style of doing things, but it served the same function and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It was still purposeful and did their work. It was just adaptation to what worked in that area. Um, you see a lot of those differences everywhere you go. It's just how the that local climate adapted and changed it to fit what they needed at the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
You
So did you see some things from Spain that we've kept over 200 years?
know? A lot. They've got some really pretty some pretty headstalls that they utilize, and in our typical Western cowboy culture, I guess it would be kind of over the top. The things hanging in front of their eyes and draping
Mm-hmm.
it. But then you see a lot of that in um, the Argentine gaucho culture, where they've kept more of that truer to the original Hispanic heritage. You don't see as much of that kept in the Western U.S. Um, type of
Right.
cowboy. It just um, I, going back what in being the history buff and researching a lot of things. Um, I've angered quite a few cowboys by spouting some history and saying, we kind of owe our cowboy heritage to the ancient Persians,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the truth. I mean, it's where it all originated. It's not just Hispanic,
Right.
the Hispanic Iberian Peninsula basically were invaded by the Moors, and they learned from the Persians, and
Yeah.
so
That's
it it, it's as historic as you want to make it. I mean, you can go
right.
as far as you want to. You
Back
know.
on. Do you have any like stories from when you were in Spain or
Um, one of the great um, memories there, there was, and it was planned, I guess. There was a horse festival, equine festival in a little tiny town in Portugal by the name of Golga, and just it really reminded me a lot of um, younger days growing up, where the whole town and everyone really got into it. It's kind of like a small town annual rodeo where it's once a year, everybody gets together,
Mhm.
everybody um, really enjoys and looks forward to it. Well, in that town, that was it for them. And just, I mean, the quality of the horse flesh there, the the way everyone really got into, I mean, the costuming, the all of the breeders come out and they bring their stand of stallions to kind of advertise and show and what they're doing, and it was, I mean, the whole town really got behind it. Everyone was riding horses down the streets, and it kind of brought back that mentality of the old hometown rodeo thing.
Mhm.
It was very neat to see tradition like that somewhere else. It
Yeah,
wasn't our deal, but it was a fun time.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Is there any other media you've worked with? Sounds like you do
Um,
other work.
I do. Uh, uh, um, I usually put up a couple saddles a year, mostly the Hawaiian saddles.
Hmm.
Um, the, I do a little bit of leather work, some carving. I love carving leather. I'm not as good at it. I don't put as much time into it
Hmm.
as I do rawhide. It's something I'm always playing with and practicing. Like anything, the
Hmm.
more time you put into anything, the better you get. I've done a little bit of horsehair. I've always admired a lot of the horsehair work. I've done a little hitching, not much. That's why I love the stuff you do with the hitching.
Thank you.
It's it's very time intensive. I mean,
Yeah.
that's part of the issue with, I guess, as makers. I mean, we really need to share more to allow um, the customer base, the lay people who are not actually doing it, to understand what goes into what we do.
Hmm.
They always see the finished products,
Hmm.
and um, they don't really conceive of all the effort that goes into just getting materials ready to
Yeah.
be made,
Yeah.
alone and the actual making time. I tell a lot of the young braiders coming to learn, the braiding's the easy part. The
Mm-hmm.
knot work,
Mm-hmm.
that's the fun part when
Mm-hmm.
you're done and ready to put knots on. It's all the prep work that takes probably 70% or better of the time. I put up all my own hides.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have just feel like I get better control on the quality that way. And people don't realize it takes me a good 12 to 15 hours of work just to get a hide prepared to be rawhide,
Yeah.
and that's just a hide that I can set aside and it's cured now, and I can let it sit until I need it.
Does that
Um,
include the time for it to stretch and
yeah,
yeah.
basically going fleshing, dehairing,
Okay.
stretch. Um, I, I'm I put a lot of time into my hides. I'm a stickler for fleshing them well and dehairing and getting them really the better quality hide you start with, the better quality finished product you're going to end up with.
Mm-hmm.
So I put a lot more time than is actually truly needed. Um, you can get away with cutting a lot of corners, putting up hide, and still make some decent rawhide.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, some good rawhide.
Mm-hmm.
It's just my nature, I guess. I'm kind of the perfectionist
Yeah.
nature. That's for me. To put a hide in the stretching frame and it's got a bunch of flesh and stuff on there, just it bothers me.
Mm-hmm.
So I will do extra.
Yeah.
Um, it's just my style. So,
What's
but
your
those cutting string, getting string right. I mean, people don't understand how long that takes
mm-hmm.
to get it right. Um, it's not something that just happens.
Yeah. What's your favorite piece to make?
Um, I'd say headstalls are probably my favorite, just
Mm-hmm.
because there's so much variation and possibility of what you can get done. They're probably one of the most difficult things to make to get something where it blends form and function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a rawhide headstall it's tough to get it to where it works and functions properly on a horse without being just pretty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a challenging one. I like the challenging stuff. I tend to um, enjoy the finer string stuff just because of that challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I guess it's kind of it's still fun, but it's more frustrating to me. Like I'll build, say, a set of reins or something, and it's funny how it works that way. But you'll be building like 4 or 5 sets of reins in a row. Someone sees it. Oh, I want one exactly like it, and it's a business ultimately, and so that's what you do. But um, it gets kind of boring to me.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
same thing. Um, I like a challenge. I
Mm-hmm.
like new stuff. So what I've learned to do is um, the order list is always out farther than I'd like it to be, just
Mm-hmm.
because of the takes. But what I've learned to do is, as orders are coming in, I allow myself time in between to dip into my idea folders,
Mm-hmm.
um, um, which I've been filling those folders for years, whether it's a quick sketch of something that pops into my mind or um, a different plating pattern I want to use, or a different knotting pattern I want to try, or I'll just kind of, whether it's notes, a sketch, something like that, I'll put it in an idea folder. And in between the orders I'm trying to fill, when I get into that monotonous mood,
Mm-hmm.
I allow myself enough time to get into a creative project. I usually have 5 or 6 projects going at the same time, just so that I don't have downtime in the
Yeah.
shop.
Yeah.
While something's getting dry, or I'm putting foundations for knots on one product and allowing it to dry and get set up right, I'll be able to jump to another project, and a constant flow in the shop.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but getting onto one of those creative items really helps keep me grounded,
Yeah.
uh, and takes away that it feeds the
Yeah.
creativity instead of
Yeah.
hampering the creativity. So yeah, the head stalls are, that's kind of my favorite thing to go do, just because of the challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've been doing a lot of jewelry, rawhide jewelry,
Mm-hmm.
earrings, bracelets, things like that. And the biggest factor is it allows me, I hate any type of waste at all.
Yeah.
And the finer, smaller things allow me to utilize remnant string from larger projects,
Mm-hmm.
and not have any waste.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I'm able to size down some string or things like that, where I can utilize shorter, smaller pieces, not have the waste. And then it also feeds that challenge of the intricate stuff,
Right.
and being not really using gear that needs a lot of strength. It's more about the pretty. So you're not worried about using those finer strands,
Mm-hmm.
strength wise.
Right.
So
Is there a particular piece that stands out to you that you've made?
uh no, I mean, there's I guess a lot of people that kind of have given me a hard time about it, but there's not a piece that I've done that I'm truly proud of. I mean, I'll have guys look at something like, well, what do you mean? Look at this. This is amazing. It's like, I think it can be improved on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, it just, there's always something that needs improvement. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I don't think there's any particular piece that really stands out, or I haven't built it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's a better answer.
That's fair. What would you pass on to the younger generation?
Uh, Hold on to traditions.
Yeah.
Um, they're important. Realize the history and the significance behind a lot of the traditions we carry on and what we do. Um, don't just participate in them without learning the history and the why behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it'll mean a lot more to you when you understand it.
Yeah.
For the younger ones wanting to learn these arts, and it is just that, as far as I'm concerned, it's as a maker, I perceive myself more as an artist
Yeah.
than I mean, that's what we do. It's
Mm-hmm.
art.
Mm-hmm.
Just a different medium. But in these arts, um, perseverance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't learn to braid rawhide overnight. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
Uh, in all the years I've been doing this, I'm still learning. I got tons more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
It never ends. So perseverance, because you will fail a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You will make a lot of mistakes, and it almost has to happen to teach you a feel. I mean, because that's what it is. It's all about feel.
Yeah.
And there's no one that can describe or write down in a book or give you a recipe that can teach you feel.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way.
Yeah.
You've got to do it and experience it in order to learn feel.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's in the teaching. That's what one thing I've really run up against is um, this idea of, and I think we're all guilty of it. We live in a world today where everything's at our fingertips,
Yeah. Yeah.
the instant gratification, really. And people come in and they look at stuff and they want to be able to get step 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to end up with this beautiful finish. But well, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Not with rawhide anyway. You've got to get your hands dirty. You've got to make the mistakes. You have to screw up.
Mm-hmm.
You have
Mm-hmm.
to perseverance, really. I
Yeah.
mean, if
Yeah.
it's something you want bad enough, you got to stick with it,
Yeah.
regardless of what it is. That doesn't just necessarily gravitate towards rawhide. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
anything you want to learn, learning a second language, whatever it is, you got to
Yeah.
persevere, push through it.
So
So
that's was the last of my questions, but do you have any other stories or anything you want to?
no, about the only other thing that I'd like to mention is that again, stick to the traditions, learn the history, learn the reasoning behind it. We live in a time that we're so fortunate. I mean, just this alone,
Yeah.
these interviews, these podcasts, the information is out there. It's amazing what's out there today.
Mm-hmm.
The ability to learn, it's probably one of the best times to get into any art, any craft, any, whether it's woodwork. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is, just because the ability to learn, the amount of knowledge that's out there, um, it's amazing. So being able to share that and pass that on,
Mm-hmm.
important. It's really important.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I really appreciate you fighting the Zoom and the technology and giving me part of your day this morning. Oh, this
It
was
was not fun for a while there trying to figure this out, but
no, no,
we got her done.
it's not, but this stuff is just too important. I think my grandfather would tell me the same story maybe 100 times because that's how history was kept,
Yep,
you know. And I think we're losing that with our technology. We spend too much time on our
exactly.
phones or whatever, and
It's convenient for us
yeah,
anymore. So take we take a lot for granted
yeah,
uh, because of the technology and because things are a lot easier for us, the convenience.
yeah.
Um, and I think that's one of the reasons that these traditional arts, on one hand, are so appreciated,
Mm-hmm.
and on the other hand, are overlooked as, how can you justify this being so
Right.
many dollars? And um, finding that middle ground, right,
Yeah.
between the two of them, because um, of what we do take for granted, what we do have available. That's a kind of mentality that a lot of the old timers I grew up around, they'd hammer into us, oh, when I was young, you just couldn't go to the local tax store. You had to make it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And today, you've got so many options. You don't
Mm-hmm.
learn to do for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people you can see to pay to do for you,
Mm-hmm.
or you don't. There's not that have to behind it. I still grew up in an era with those old timers where they made you do the have to.
Yeah.
You had to learn the old way, and I'm thankful for
Yeah.
it. But it just it's a little too easy today.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I just can't tell you what a great time I had. The history is so cool. So